Hello, Chem 4800 students. We are entering Module 6 this week, so we're already a third of the way into the semester. It's going by very fast. And this week we're taking the next step in building our program for Dr. Stacy Perriman Clark so that we can help her to increase enrollment in the African American Studies and African Studies majors and minors. So up till now, you've conducted several steps in this process. We've done our client interview with Dr. Perriman Clark to gather information about what she needs. You have written your needs assessment paper, which I will take a look at and give you feedback on this week. Our next step in the process is to design a survey that we will administer to students to find out how much do they already know about these programs, what more do they need to know, what would motivate them to enroll in these programs, and what other kind of information that they might need from Dr. Perriman Clark and her area in order to encourage them to enroll. So as a class, we're going to be devising a survey that we will send out and administer to students to gather this information for ourselves and for Dr. Perriman Clark. So that's what we're working on this week. Each of you will be completing this survey design assignment, and we will take the best and brightest from everybody's assignments and combine them into one survey that we will use on behalf of the class. Okay, so this video, I am going to take you step by step through that survey design paper and tell you all the elements of it and explain what's in them. And then I'm also going to lecture on writing objectives, which is a future step in our process. So we'll be getting to that step later, but I like to lecture ahead of time so you have a foretaste of what's coming. So again, in this video, I'm going to take you through that survey design process, and then I'm going to lecture about objectives, which is a future topic. If you have any questions about this survey design process, go back to Module 5 and review those materials that are there again and ask me your questions. Please send them sooner rather than later. Sometimes I get questions late on a Friday or on a Saturday, and if I can't get to them right away, it's very stressful for both of us, I'm sure. Also, please ask specific questions when you have them. Just saying I don't understand the assignment doesn't help me much in getting you the assistance you need. So tell me exactly what it is that you need to know, okay? So on the next slide, you're going to see the survey design assignment. I copied and pasted it onto the slide so that I can talk you through it. It's going to look very tiny on the slide, but it's the same document that's in the module. So if you go into Module 6, open that up, you can print it or just view it on your screen, and you'll have the full-size version. Okay, so let's talk about the survey that each of you is going to design this week and upload to the Dropbox, and that we will later compile into one class survey. Okay, let's get going. Again, this is the same information that's on the document in Module 6, the written instructions. You're going to be writing a survey, and it's going to have several different sections. First, you have an introductory paragraph. You'll also have a closing paragraph at the end. And in between there will be some questions. So think of surveys that you've taken in the past when someone comes up to you with something on a clipboard. That's what we're aiming at here, although this one will be done electronically. So your first step will be to write an introductory paragraph for your survey. And here are some items that you should include in that introductory paragraph. Number one, who we are and why we're conducting the survey. Okay, so who you are, who we are, why we're asking for this information. So we're conducting a survey of WMU students to discover what they know about these programs and what might motivate them to enroll, right? That kind of thing is what you'll say. And we are the COM 4800 capstone communication class. Tell them who you represent and what the survey is designed to discover. Tell your participant in that opening paragraph that they're not required to take or complete the survey. We're not offering them any payment. They can opt out at any time, so they can stop at any time they want to. Even if they agree to take the survey, if they get so far in, you get halfway in and you decide you don't want to answer any more questions, it's their prerogative to opt out. Tell them approximately how many questions there are, approximately how much of their time you think it'll take, and then thank them, and we'll provide them with a link to the survey, which I will set up later once we have our full survey made. So first step, write an introductory paragraph, who we are, what we're doing, and what rights the respondent has in taking the survey. Okay, so that shouldn't be too difficult. Then you want to write your survey questions. Okay, and in the last module, I talked about different types of survey questions and how they're used. We talked about demographic questions, right? So questions asking the person about different demographic groups they might belong to. You only want to ask the questions that are useful and necessary to the survey. Demographic questions can be things like how old the person is, what grade they're in, what their household income is, what their gender is, things like that, but only ask the ones that you feel are relevant to this survey. Remember, you can also use those demographic questions as filter questions. So you can say, if you were to say, like, are you a WMU student? If yes, continue. If no, skip down to question 10 or however you're structuring your survey. So you can use those demographic questions as those filters as well. But put those first, only ask the ones that are useful and necessary to the body of survey questions that you're asking. Okay. Step 3, list at least 10 survey questions that you want to ask students to derive the information we're looking for. I'm asking you to use at least one of each of these listed types of questions. Now, if you're doing 10 questions or more, you'll need multiples of each of these, but use at least one of each of these, okay? The first one is a Likert scale question. Likert scales were discussed last week, and I'll include a document in this module with some examples of those, okay? A ranking question. Ranking questions were also discussed last week, so make sure you're formatting that correctly. A multiple choice question. Again, remember when you create the answer possibilities for a multiple choice question, they need to be mutually exclusive and exhaustive, which again we discussed last week. Have at least one open-ended question where they provide the answer, so they would type in a box and explain in their own words. And then you want to have a clearinghouse question at the end. And a clearinghouse question is a question to get at any information you missed. So it might be something like, is there anything else you'd like to tell me? Or is there anything I forgot to ask that you think is relevant to this issue? That's what a clearinghouse question is. So put one of those at the end of your question list. So you've got your intro, your questions, and then you're going to write a closing paragraph at the end, just basically saying thank you for your time, and your responses will enable us to do X, and explain what their responses are going to provide for us. Okay, do your best with this. There will be opportunities to revise later, but we're starting to formulate our big class survey so that we can gather some more information from actual WMU students, okay? If you have any specific questions about this paper or this process, send me an email, and I'm going to continue this video with the lecture on writing objectives, which is a future unit that we will be addressing. Okay, so it's giving you a preview of something that'll come after the survey activity is completed. This week you should read the section of chapter 4 of the text that has to do with writing objectives for a teaching/training program, and also take good notes on this video so that as we transition into writing objectives, you will have the information that you need. This will also be on the midterm exam. In order to model this behavior for you, you know I always start each of these lectures with one or more objectives that I have for you. So in this lecture, or after this lecture, and after you read the material in the training and development book, you will be able to write learning objectives that are observable, measurable, attainable, and specific. So we're going to learn what each of those 4 terms means and why those are important elements of good learning objectives. To give you a sense of where objectives fit in with our project this semester, we started with the needs assessment, which was our client interview. So we talked to Dr. Stacy Perryman-Clark about what her needs are, and each of you completed a needs assessment paper where you synthesized the information that Dr. Perryman-Clark gave us and thought about some overall goals and objectives for this project in a more macro way, and we're going to be refining those as we go forward. Along with a needs assessment of the client, in a project like this, we do a task analysis, and for us, that's going to be our participant survey, which will be the survey we create and administer to students, asking them what they already know, what they want to know, what their process is for choosing classes, all kinds of things like that, so that we know what process a student goes through when they're deciding whether or not to enroll in a course. And that's going to be really useful information because it's going to allow us to take what Dr. Perryman-Clark said her needs were and where the students are already at with their knowledge, and allow us to analyze the gap, if there's a gap, and how do we bridge that gap. So these are all building blocks in a process. Then the next step, when we get our student surveys back, will be to write some objectives for our projects. And that's what I'm going to talk about in this video, how we decide upon those objectives and how we write effective objectives. It's a step that people often skip when they are creating a project, but you skip it at your peril. It's a very useful step because it kind of forces you to think through a piece of the process that's very important. So we'll talk a little more about that today. And then writing the objectives will lead to creating your project, which is going to be the end result of this course, where you will create some sort of a creative artifact or a creative tool to offer to Dr. Clark that will help her to increase enrollment in the program. So as I said in the beginning of the course, that might be creating a video, a handbook, a game, any number of ways you could approach that to give her tools she can use to help students enroll in her program. Okay, so again, I'm taking you through this step by step. Each step builds on the last, and each step leads us toward the finished project. So from our survey, we're going to be able to determine what students already know and where they need more knowledge or experience. So what do they already know about these programs, if anything? What are their motivations to enroll in these programs, if any? Our survey results will give us that information, and from those we'll be able to create some objectives for our projects. In other words, what does our project need to do? What is the gap here, and what does our project need to accomplish? It's important to understand the difference between goals and objectives. And these are two words that we often use interchangeably in conversation, but they're not the same thing. Your goal is your big macro thing that you want to accomplish, whereas objectives are the smaller steps you take to get there. So your goal might be, I want to become financially independent. An objective might be, I want to save $100 a month and put that in my savings account. That's a small, doable step toward the greater goal. So for our projects, our goal is to help Dr. Stacy Perryman Clark increase enrollment in the African American Studies and African Studies courses and programs. That's our big macro goal, but how do we get there? How do we accomplish that? We're going to figure that out through writing objectives, and our survey information will help us decide what those objectives should be. What steps do we need to take? We need to find out what people already know and what their motives already are so we can figure out what we need to do to close any gap between where they are and where we want them to be. On this slide, I've given you another example of the difference between goals and objectives. If you were a restaurant manager, one of your goals might be that trainees know the menu. Okay, so you're training new waiters and your goal is that they know the menu. Okay, but how do you break that down into steps? How do you measure that? So one of your objectives toward that goal might be that by the end of today's training, each of these people will be able to explain 5 menu items accurately. That's an objective. It's a very specific step that you can take toward meeting your big overarching goal. So keep that in mind as we go forward. Our goal is to help Dr. Clark increase enrollment, but our objectives will be the steps that we take to get there. A well-written objective meets these 4 criteria. It is observable, measurable, attainable, and specific. And in the slides coming up, I will go through each of these points one by one, but a good objective meets all 4 of these criteria. The first criterion of a good objective is that it is observable. So you can observe the behavior of the participant to tell whether or not they can do the thing that you're asking them to do. In the restaurant example, maybe your objective would be that waiters know how to set a table properly according to restaurant instructions. So you could watch them set the table and see if they can do that properly and then check that box. So that is an observable objective. In our case, when we're trying to get students to enroll in certain courses, think about things you could have them do that would be observable. Do we want them to be able to, for example, find the courses on the course offerings page of the university? Do we want them to be able to write down a question that they could ask their advisor about how well it would fit into their major program? Something they can do that we theoretically could actually observe them doing. The second criteria for good objectives is that they are measurable. There's some sort of parameters that you can measure in order to determine if they meet the objective. So you might remember in A prior example of training waiters, the idea was that the waiters will be able to explain the preparation and ingredients in 5 menu items. So that's measurable. There's 5. They need to be able to do 5 in order to meet that criterion. So for measurable, an example given here, you might want them to complete the task with fewer than 3 errors. You might want them to complete the task within a limited amount of time. So if we want students to be able to find the African American Studies courses on the WMU course offerings page or in the course catalog, we might want them to be able to identify 2 different courses that might fit into their degree program. That would be a measurable objective. The third criterion for good objectives is that they are attainable. They're realistic given the circumstances that your participant is experiencing. So to go back to the restaurant example, let's say you have a 1-hour training session with these new waiters. Ideally, you would like them to know the entire menu, but what is attainable within that hour? How much menu knowledge is really attainable within that hour? That's why you might write an objective that they will be able to explain 5 menu items. That's a more attainable goal within the time period that you have. So with our project, what is attainable or achievable for us? Ideally, we might like to get people to switch their major to African American Studies, but maybe a more attainable goal is to get a student to enroll in one course, or maybe even to just get them to consider enrolling in one course, or to talk to their advisor about those courses. Those kind of objectives might be more realistic given the expectation we have of our participants. Lastly, objectives need to be specific, and this is a tough one. This one trips up a lot of people. You need to identify the precise actions you want people to be able to do, such as the example here, recall 3 things and write them down. Okay, that's a specific thing that they can do. A lot of people write bad objectives. A lot of professors write bad objectives that have language like what's listed on the slide here. Things like, students will know such and such, or will appreciate such and such, or the big one, will understand such and such. What if my objective is that students will understand communication? That is a really lousy learning objective because it's not specific, it's not measurable. How do I know if I've achieved that objective? How do I know if my students have met it? I don't. I have no way of quantifying that or measuring that. So if you say your objective is for WMU students will appreciate the value of the African American Studies courses, how do you measure that, whether they appreciate it or not? How do you quantify appreciation? That's too abstract. So that's a bad objective. It's not a specific objective. If you want them to appreciate the advantages of that program, you might have an objective like students would be able to write down 3 reasons why courses in the African American Studies program would benefit them in their current major program, or would benefit them in their pursuit of their chosen career. That's a very specific, measurable objective. So try to get away from language like your participants will understand or appreciate or know XYZ, because there's no way to determine whether or not you've accomplished an objective like that. Your next steps: upload your survey design paper by the end of the week. Directions are in Module 6 and at the beginning of this video. Let's talk a little bit about the midterm exam that's coming up in week 8. That will be a written exam. It's not multiple choice in this course. I will be giving you a study guide prior to that that will tell you which topics you need to review, but it will be a written, like essay style exam. Let's see, what else do we need to talk about? We will have that survey design paper due on the 20th, and we will be conducting those surveys the week of February 27th, and I'm going to ask everybody to participate in that. More details to come. If you have any questions, contact me. Keep making good progress. I'm really pleased with what I'm seeing so far, and I will talk to you again very soon. Have a great week.